Hello everyone. In today's chapter, we are going to begin studying about data structures in Python, and we are going to start with the most important data structure in Python, which is the list. Okay, you will be using a list in a wide variety of programs in every kind of application that you can imagine. It is one of the most basic and essential data structures in your Python programming toolkit. So I request you to please be very attentive in these lessons. So till now we have looked at variables which can hold single values. Okay. For example, we were assigning a value of an integer to a, or we were assigning a float, or we were assigning a single string to a variable. Okay. But what if we want to have, or what if we want to hold a lots of values at one place and for a specific application or for a specific purpose? So for that, we use list data structure. So let us look at what lists are. So a list is a value like any other value. Okay, example, the integer 2 or the string 3. So a list can be stored in a variable just like any other value. Okay, so this is the first thing that you need to be aware of. That list is also a value like any other value. Okay, so you can assign it to a variable, you can pass it to a function, and you can return it from a function, and you can do all those things to lists. Okay, but what is the difference? A list is a value that can hold many values in an ordered sequence. Okay, so to make it clear, let us look at an actual list. So a list value looks something like this. So this whole thing enclosed by square brackets, this whole value is a list value. Okay, so this you can assign to a variable, or you can pass to a function, or return from a function. Okay, but inside this list value you will see that there are many values in a sequence. This is the first value, this is the second value, third value, fourth value, fifth value, and sixth value. So you can see that there are 6 different values in this list. And one interesting thing that you will notice here, that they are all of different types. One value is of type string, integer, float. Again we have got a value of string data type. Then we have a boolean data type and another value of none type. Okay, so we have many different types of values in the same list. Okay, and this whole thing which is enclosed within the square brackets, this is one list value. Fine. So some terminology here. Values inside list are called items. So this list has 6 items. So here cat 1, 2.5, etc. are items. And items in a list are separated by commas and enclosed within parentheses or square brackets. Okay. Items in a list are put between square brackets and separated by commas. Fine. So how do you define a list? So this is how you define a list. Open a square bracket, then write all the elements of your list separated by commas. They can be of any data type, that is not a problem. Then to end the list, just close it using a square bracket. Okay, now you can treat this whole list just like a value, as you treat any other value of an integer or string. I'm assigning it to a variable named mylist. Okay, by using the same assignment operator that I will use for any other kind of value. Fine, so that is simple. Next is an empty list. Okay, so how do you create an empty list which has no elements? So that is simply open and close the square brackets. This has 0 elements, so this is an empty list. All right, and I'm assigning it to a variable named empty list in the same way by using the single equals operator. Similarly, if I want to create numbers, a list of numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so this becomes my list of numbers from 1 to 5, and I'm assigning it to this variable numbers. Let us move forward. So the next idea that you need to understand is indexing a list. Okay, so what is indexing a list? Getting a particular value from a list is called indexing a list. So we have 6 values in this list. You saw that. Suppose I want to get the third value in the list. How will I get that? That operation is called indexing a list. So how do we index a list? So you can see that from this diagram. So we'll write the name of the list, which is my list. Then we'll put square brackets, and within that we will pass the index of the item that which we wish to fetch. Okay. So if I want to get the first item, I'll use the index 0. Okay. So one more thing to remember in Python is that at many places you will encounter this concept of an index, and at all those places we start counting the index in Python from 0. Okay. In general, whenever we count numbers, we say 1, 2, 3, so on. But in Python indexes, when you start counting, you will always start the count from 0. And next 1, 2, 3, and so on. Okay. So this list has 6 elements. So the indexes will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. So if you want the index of the first element, or if you want to get the first item, that will be mylist and within square bracket 0. To get the second item, mylist 1. To get the third item, mylist 2, so on. To get the last item, you will use mylist and within square brackets 5. Okay. So let us just run these and see some outputs. What is mylist 0? So you can see that mylist 0, I'm getting cat. Mylist 3. So when it says mylist 3, I have to go and look at the fourth element. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it should print hello world. So yeah, mylist 3 is hello world. Okay. So now I think list indexing is clear. Now one thing that you need to remember is, if the index is more than the number of values in your list, Python throws an index error. So this is a very common error that you will encounter, and you need to understand why you are getting this error. So you saw that our list only has 6 elements. So the only valid indices are starting from 0 and going up till 5. But what if I use this index 10? I'm trying to get the 10th or value of this mylist. If I run this, so you see that Python says index error, list index out of range. So here it is very clear that the range of values for the index is only from 0 to 5. Okay. So that is why it is throwing an index error, and it is clearly indicating that in this first line there is an error. All right. Next is, so how to fix this? So it has to be some number within 0 to 5. So if it is 5, for example, then Python doesn't throw any problem. Next is, indexes can only be integer values and not floats. So what happens if I use a floating point number here? So these values within the square brackets, when you're indexing a list or when you're trying to get the value of an item in a list, they can only be integer values. They cannot be floats. So 9.3 is a float. What happens if I run this? So you see that it is giving type error. And if you read this error, list indices must be integers or slices, not float. Okay, so it is clearly stating that this is my list index and this is currently a float, and Python is complaining that it cannot be a float. It must be either an integer or a slice. So what is a slice? We'll just look a little bit later. And next thing, very interesting thing that you need to remember is, lists can also contain other lists. Okay. In the beginning, I showed you here that this list has items of different data types. One is string, one is integer, one is float. Similarly, one of these data types can also be another list. Okay. There is no problem in Python where if you want to have lists within lists, that is absolutely valid. So for example, this is my entire list value. If I look at the first item of this list, this is another list in itself, which itself has 2 items, Hari and Madhav. The second item is another list again, which has 3 values. The third item is simply true, and I can have a fourth item, 4.0. So if I try to print my second item, my list 2, how will I get the second item? we know that indexing starts from 0. So this is my index 0, and this second item is index 1. So I have to use index 1 here. You see that I get a list 1, 2, 3. Okay, if I want to get the second item of this, again I'll put 1 and I get 2. So I hope you're able to follow this. This whole thing till the closing square bracket here, this will evaluate to a list. This will evaluate to this list. Okay. Now if I put brackets again, now this will go inside this list and pick the second element here because index is 1. So it will evaluate to the value true 2. So another way to say this is, suppose if I say some x is my list 2 1, and if I print x, because this is already a list, if I print x1, so I'm getting 2 here, you can see that. So instead of doing this in 2 steps like this, what I did is I replaced this x here by my list 2. I'm sorry, I've replaced x here by this whole thing, my list 2 1. So now you can see that I'm getting this value too. So I hope you understand the logic of how this indexing of a list of lists is working. This will evaluate to a list. So I can again use the indexing operator on top of that list. So that will give me an integer value. Fine. Another interesting thing in Python is you can also have negative indices. Okay. Python also allows the use of negative indices while indexing. What is the meaning of a negative index? So index -1 refers to the last element of the list. Index -2 refers to the second last element, and so on. Okay. So let us print my list. So this is my list, cat 1, 2.5, etc. So now if I print, I want to get the last element of a list. So one way to do that is, I know that this list has 6 elements. Okay. So if I do 6 minus 1, I'll get the last element of the list, which is none. Okay. Another way to do that is simply say, this is one way to get last element of list. But another way is simply say -1. Okay. That will also return the value none. Similarly, if I try to get the second last element, I have to use -2. Another way to get last element, get second to last element. So this will return the value true, which is my second last element. Okay. So in this way you can use negative indices in Python. They will just refer to the elements counting from the back. So -1 refers to the last element, -2 refers to the second to last element, -3 refers to the third to last element, and so on. Okay. Now the next very important operation that you need to be aware of is slicing lists. Okay. So earlier in this error, you saw that indices must be integers or slices. So right now we are going to look at what these slices are. So we use the slicing operation to get a sublist of a list. Okay. So my list within square brackets, if you pass a single integer, so that is an index. We have already seen this. So what is a slice? A slice is when within the square brackets, you pass two integers which are separated by a colon. Okay. So what are you trying to do here? What are these two integers? So the first integer is the index at which the slice starts. So basically you have this list cat 1 2.5 hello world true none etc. Okay, suppose you want to isolate this sublist consisting of only these three items. Okay, if you want to do this, then you use the slicing operation. Okay, so to this slicing operation you have to give what is the starting index from which your slice starts. Okay, so this sublist consisting of these three items, we call this a slice of this whole list. Just like you have a slice of bread, right, which is one piece of the whole bread. Similarly, this piece of the whole list is called as one slice of the list. So this slice starts at this position and ends at this position. Okay, so those are the two things that you're specifying here. So the first integer is the index at which the slice starts, and the second integer is the index up to but not including which the slice goes up to. Okay, so what do I mean? So in the range function, if you remember, whatever was the upper limit, that was the number up to which we were going, but we were not actually going till there. We were stopping one step before. Similarly, the case is with the slicing here. So if you specify 4, what it means that we only go till index 3. We are starting at the index 1 and we are going till index 3. Okay, so let us actually understand this via some examples that will make it very clear. So if I try to do this my list 1 to 4, so what do I get here? I'm starting at the index 1. Okay, the left index is the index at which I start. This is index 0, this is index 1. So I'm starting at the index 1 and there my value is also 1. Next I'm going till index 3. Okay, because I have to go up till 4, but I don't include 4. I have to exclude 4. So I have to stop one step before, which is index 3. This is index 1, this is index 2, and hello world is index 3. So I'll get these three elements in my sublist. Okay. Similarly, if I do my list 1 to 5, so I'll get one more element. So I'll also include this element, the fourth index, because here the upper index is 5. So I'll go till 4. So I'll also include true. Fine. So even in these, in the slicing operation, you can use a negative index. So how does that look like? If I say my list 1 to minus 1. So minus 1 refers to the last element of the list, right? So I'll not include the last element of the list. I'll stop one step before. So I've stopped at true. Okay, so this works exactly the same as this. You can get the last element either using 5 or minus 1. And because I don't include the last element, so I stop my slice at this index which corresponds to the item true. Fine. So now here you saw that in a slice we have to specify 2 indices, right? But in some cases we'll omit one of the indices. Okay, in some cases we can omit one of those indices. So when do we omit indices? Suppose your first index is the beginning of the list. Okay, if you want your slice to start right at the beginning of the list, then you do not need to actually specify the index 0. If I specify in the index 0, what does it mean? That means I'm starting at the beginning of the list. And suppose I go till 2. So I'll get these two elements, cat and 1. But another way to write this is slice beginning starting at beginning of the list. I can simply omit this 0 and simply write colon 2. Okay. If I omit this 0, it is understood by default that it will be the value 0. So you see that I get the same result. either if I specify 0 or if I omit it. Okay. Similarly, there is another case when you omit. So here I'll just specify that when starting, when a slice starts at the beginning of the list, the index 0 may be omitted. Okay. Similarly, if you're starting at some point in the list, but you want to go till the end of the list. So if I'm starting at the third index, but I want to go till the end, I have 6 elements. So I can go till index 5. So I'll specify 6 here because I want to stop at 5. So starting at slice, starting at 3, going till end of list. So you can see that I'm starting at the third index, which refers to the fourth item in my list, and I'm going till the end of the list. Fine. But if I'm going till the end, I can omit the second index, second value in the second index in this slice. Okay. So I'll say 3 colon and I won't specify anything. So this by default means I'm going till the end of the list. If second index in a slice is omitted, it means to go till end of list. Fine. If I run this, you will see that I'm again going till the end of the list. Okay. Slicing is again a very important operation. It is used to get a sublist of a list. So next thing is modifying the values of a list. So in this list you saw that we have 6 elements, right? 6 items I should say. Right? Suppose you wanted to change the value of this third item or the item at the index 2 in the list. So how can you do that? So in my list, you want to change the second index. So you do it exactly as how you would do an assignment operation. So I'll change this to 3.5. Now I'll print my list. So you can see that the element at the second index, which was earlier 2.5, this has changed to 3.5. Okay, what did I do here? I first indexed my list 2. Okay, now to that I am assigning the value 3.5. Just like an assignment operation, but I'll not assign directly to the list. I'll assign to that item. Okay, my list 2. And that will change the item at second position. Suppose I want to change the item at the first position to dog. So I want to change so here you see that my first element has changed. What have I done? To change it, I will do an assignment operation just like how if I wanted to change a variable. But instead of the variable name here, what I will pass the address of the item which I want to change or the index of the item which I want to change. Okay, clear? Next is list concatenation and replication. Okay. So if you have 2 lists and if you want to join those 2 lists, how will you do that? And if you want to repeat a list, how will you do that? So these are called concatenation and replication operations. Replication means repeating a list and concatenation means combining 2 lists. So plus operator is used for concatenating lists and asterisk or multiplication operator is used for replicating lists. Okay. So concatenation is combining 2 lists. So suppose you have a list 1 which is 1, 2, 3 and you have a list 2 which is A, B, and C. So you want a list 3 which has first 1, 2, and 3 followed by A, B, and C. You want all of those in a single list. Well, how will you do that? I can say list 3 equals list 1 plus list 2. So this is called as concatenation. So what am I doing here? So what will happen in the result is that first I'll have all the elements of list 1 followed by all the elements of list 2. They will be in a single list, which is list 3. So now you can see I got a single list with all the elements in it. So similarly, suppose if you want to add a single value to a list. For example, my list 2 has A, B, and C. If I wanted to add one more value to my list, how can I do that? I can say list 2 is list 2 plus I want to add D to this. Okay. But concatenation operation can only happen between two lists. Okay. So I'll create a list with a single element D and I'll add it. So now you see that my list 2 has A, B, C, and D. So what have I done? I have done list 2 plus a list with a single element D. Fine. And this whole new value, I'm replacing that in the old value of list 2. So now if I print list 2, I'll get the value A, B, C, D. So this is how we add a single, if you want to extend a list by single value, you can do using this. But instead of doing it like this, what if you try to do it like this? Okay, suppose I say list 4 is list 2 plus, instead of enclosing it in a list, if I simply say E and try to print this, what will be the result? So it will throw an error, can only concatenate list to list, not string. So what does this error mean? So this error is occurring in this line. So I want to add this element E to list 2. Okay, list 2 currently has A, B, C, D. I want to add another element E and add to list 4. So this is of data type list and this is of data type string. Okay, so we cannot actually do this plus operation or concatenation operation on a string and a list. Both of them should be lists. So that is why if I put it in square brackets, now this becomes a list with a single element, single item, which is this E. Okay, so now because this is also a list and this is also a list, I can do the concatenation operation. And you see, this is the result that I get. Okay, so what is the replication operation? So replication is repetition of a list. So if you have a list 5, let us say, which is A, Z, Q. Now if you want a list in which these same values are repeated again and again, suppose 5 times. Okay, so I can simply say print times 5. Okay, I'll use this multiplication operator and I'll specify the number of times I want these items to be repeated. Okay, so now you see that these same items have been repeated 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so this is called the replication operation. You can also do it like this, print. So again I am getting an output in which this has been repeated 6 times. Fine. So errors when trying to concatenate a value to a list, we have already looked at that. You know that both must be of the list data type. If instead you try to add a string to a list or an integer to a list, that will throw an error. but instead if you enclose it in square brackets, so now you see that it works without any problem. Okay, finally, I want to, before concluding this lecture, I would like to show you a practical example of how to use a list. So the problem that we want to solve is, we want to read an arbitrary number of values from input. Okay. So if you see all the problems that I've given you till now in your assignments, we have exactly specified how many inputs we are reading from the user. It's either 2 inputs or 3 inputs and so on. Okay. But what if we want to read an arbitrary number of inputs from the user? We do not know beforehand how many inputs the user is going to give. We only know that the inputs will be ended by some character. For example, we only know that terminating character is ampersand, or terminating string is ampersand. Okay. So now if we want to read this arbitrary number of characters, how can we read them? So the easiest way is to put all of those values which we are reading from the input into a list. Okay, how to do that? So initially we'll create an empty list in which we want to hold all the values. Okay, let us call it input list, and I'm defining an empty list. Initialize an empty list. Fine. In this empty list, we are going to add all the input values one by one. Okay. So definitely, naturally, you see that when I have to read from the user many times, what should I do? I should use a loop. And here I do not know beforehand exactly how many times I have to run my loop. So I cannot use a for loop, because whenever I use a for loop, I know exactly how many times I have to run that loop. So instead I'll be using a while loop. So I'll say while true. So this is an infinite loop. This while loop will go on running. I'll just, whenever I read this ampersand character, I'll break out of this loop. Fine. So what I'll do is, I'll read an input from a user. So I'll say current input is input, enter the next input. I'll read the input from the user. I'll check what is the input. If current input is equal to ampersand, that means my input stream has ended. That means user has given all his inputs that he wants to give. Is ampersand, then break, else input list. I want to add this whatever element that whatever value I have read inside this current input, that I want to add to input list. Okay, right now input list is empty, but within this loop I want to add again and again one by one elements to this input list. So here we saw how to do that. We can do that using this concatenation operator. So I'll say input list plus, I'll make a list with a single element, and that element will be current element, current input, sorry. Okay. Now if I run this, so enter the next input. First I'll say first, second, third, and I want to end now, ampersand. So now you see that the loop has stopped. Now let us look at our input list. So you see that inside my input list, I have read all the inputs which the user has given. Okay. So this is the key idea here. So for example, if I tell you that you have to read only 3 inputs, in that case you could have defined 3 variables, input 1, input 2, input 3. But in this case, when you do not know how many inputs the user is going to give, there is no way you can beforehand define your variables input 1, input 2 and so on. So there, because the list, you can keep on adding elements to it as many as you want. So therefore, in such a case, the list becomes the right tool to use. And here we have seen how to actually use it. This is the way in which technique to append to a list. So our list was empty, but we appended these three items one after the other to the list. So the technique that we used is to use this concatenation operator. Is to use concatenation operator. Okay. So that is all for this chapter. This is only the beginning of lists. There are a lot more applications of lists and functions and methods on lists, which we'll be looking at in the next chapter. Thank you very much.